structure you see behind me is the hatchery diversion dam, a fish ladder, and an intake that supplies water to the Issaquah salmon hatchery. It's one of two sources of water we have for the facility. And the structure's been in place since the hatchery was built back in the 1930s. Primary function here is to provide water to the hatchery. The structure is quite old and it has many flaws associated with it. One of those flaws is the fact that the structure was undermined, and so there's been some repairs to it since then to address that problem. Those repairs, however, have created some other significant problems for us. You can probably see an apron that sits in front of the dam itself, and that presents a problem for adult fish that return to the creek and being stranded, and also less capable of migrating the ladder associated with the structure to make access to the upper watershed. The Department of Fish and Wildlife, in conjunction with the City of Issaquah and other partners, have been very interested in trying to address this situation for a long period of time. And we've been working in different formats since the early 1990s to try and address the problems associated with the structure so that we can come up with a solution that still provides us this reliable source of water to the hatchery and at the same time provide access and migration opportunities for the fish returning to the system.
Well, as it turns out, Issaquah Creek is just a wonderful stream. It's very productive, and it's somewhat unique in that it runs through a urban area, and for that reason it's subject to different pressures, the things that go along with residential and commercial development. But we're also fortunate that the local community is very supportive of efforts to conserve the environmental values of this stream. And one of those values is a very healthy fish run to the stream, both historically and currently. Unfortunately, the fish that return to the stream now are primarily hatchery fish. It's only unfortunate in that this stream used to have a sizable natural run, and we believe that run can be restored, and that's the primary purpose of this project. The fish are important because they sustain commercial fisheries and also the biology of the stream. They're very important to the ecology of the stream. The hatchery, though, has played a key role in all of this in perpetuating the run, in spite of the fact that this dam has been a partial barrier to upstream movements of fish since it was built back in the 30s. One of the reasons it's been a barrier is that it was built based on using criteria that back then were deemed sufficient for fish passage. Well, we now know that that's not the case. So the fish ladder that you see here, which is the step-like structure in the middle of the dam, and over to the side, the juvenile bypass system, those aren't really adequate by today's standards to pass fish upstream and downstream. So we actually documented fish being held up and actually not and turning around downstream because they couldn't ascend the fishway. And based on that evidence, we successfully argued and secured funding for this dam removal project.
Fixing the fish passage problem here is a high priority because of the fact that it blocks most of the migration of salmon to the upper watershed. The new design is addressing that by replacing the dam with a series of boulder weirs that have small drops that they can easily pass through. The water supply intake itself would be of a design that also doesn't block fish passage because there'll be free flowing water past the intake where the water is drawn off, and therefore not an obstruction of all the fish. The city became aware of this project in the mid-2000s is when the regional agencies developed what's called the Chinook Salmon Conservation Plan for the local watershed, the Cedar Lake Sammamish Lake Washington watershed. In that study, this dam was identified as a significant barrier to fish passage. And at that time, the Corps of Engineers was involved in a study to replace the dam with another concrete structure with a larger fish ladder. That study ended around 2005, mainly due to lack of federal funds to continue with the final design and construction. And so at that time, the city, with the State Fish and Wildlife Department, applied for a grant, partnered together and applied for a grant to restart the study and actually go back to the beginning and look at alternatives to replacing the dam with another dam. And so during that process, starting about 2008, starting with a feasibility study, we concluded and came up with a preferred alternative of replacing the dam with the boulder weirs and a different type of intake for the water supply. You know, how we came up with this design of the boulder weirs and the new intake came through a fairly rigorous analysis of a number of alternatives of replacing the dam with another dam, looking at another bypass fish ladder type of arrangement where the fish can get around the dam without having to replace it. But in the end, because the dam is in such bad shape, it had to be removed and replaced with something. So the boulder weir concept is fairly common for fish passage because it mimics natural conditions fairly closely as far as a natural step that a fish can easily get up through because they're fairly low drops that they could easily jump. And it also is compatible with the environment because in the end, although it's made out of a lot of rock, it pretty much blends into the environment as the stream heals itself and vegetation along the edges grows up.
Up to this point, the fish returning to the hatchery have been fish that were spawned and reared at the hatchery and released. They came back a couple of years later, and that cycle repeats itself. We've determined that if you do that over a long enough period, the fish become domesticated. That is to say, they lose some of their wild traits and are less successful once they're released into the wild. And that translates into lower survival, lower reproduction success. And so it's a process that we'd like to avoid. The best way to avoid it is to make sure you use natural fish, that is fish that were spawned, or progeny of naturally spawning fish. You integrate them into the hatchery production. One of the advantages of opening up Issaquah Creek is we're going to create a pool of naturally produced fish that can be infused into the hatchery strain and used to bring up their genetic profile. So we have to find that optimal balance between hatchery production and natural production. But the natural fish will definitely contribute to the hatchery broodstock, and vice versa. The hatchery fish will contribute to the natural. But overall, production will go up, and the fish will adapt to the system and start to take off on their own.